Alden Mayer. I'm Director of Strategy and Policy for the Union of Concerned Scientists in Washington, D.C., but today I'm speaking to you from the Climate Negotiations in Bonn, Germany. What they've done the last 2 days here is complete the plenary sessions, the first discussion on the draft negotiating text. The chair of this process tabled 2 weeks ago. They've now gotten comments from all the countries that wanted to take the floor and speak, and tomorrow they will start working section by section and going through in some detail what she's laid out, starting with the issue of financial institutions, which has been a very high-profile issue in these negotiations. Basically, are we going to set up some kind of new financial structure to provide the much greater flow of resources, financial and technology resources to developing countries, deal with clean energy technology deployment, reducing deforestation of the tropical rainforests, and helping the poorest and most vulnerable countries adapt to the impacts of climate change, which they're already starting to experience. There's not total satisfaction with the chair's negotiating text, but everyone is accepting it as the basis for moving forward. Of course, it's early days here. We're in the second day of a 2-week session in Bonn, and we'll know better by the end of this week as countries start to engage contentious issues if they're moving forward and actually starting to negotiate. The other issue that's going on is they've had meetings of the two permanent bodies of these negotiations, the so-called subsidiary bodies. In the subsidiary body on science and technological advice, they're dealing with issues such as land use change in forestry, what counts in the clean development mechanism to be used to attract funds from developed countries for developing country work there. In the subsidiary body and implementation, they're dealing with issues such as reporting by both developed and developing countries of the actions they're taking at home, how the existing financial structures are working, how to organize the meeting process between and during Cancun this December, the next major climate summit in December in Mexico. And again, they've completed the introductory plenary sessions of those two meetings. Tomorrow they start going into what's called contact groups, breaking out on particular topics where the chair has assigned delegates, usually a developing country and a developed country delegate, who chair the contact group, try to work with negotiators to come back with proposals and proposed text for a decision. This will all culminate next week, next Wednesday, when they come back into plenary, get reports from the contact groups. We'll know then how close they've come to agreement on these building block issues. The chair also announced today that she's asked the Ambassador de Alba from Mexico. Mexico is, of course, the incoming presidency of the Cancun Climate Summit in December. She's asked Ambassador de Alba to consult informally with countries over the next week or so on the very contentious issue of legal form. What kind of treaty or treaties should we be looking to produce that process? And of course, there's dramatically different perspectives on that issue among countries such as the United States, Europe, China, Japan, and others. So Ambassador de Alba is going to have his hands full to see if he can come back with some initial conclusions on that to resolve that issue. And gridlock in the Cancun, that can make it almost impossible to agree on any substantive issues there because countries wouldn't have agreement on the path forward from Cancun to the next climate summit in South Africa. And if you don't agree on what kind of treaty or instrument you're trying to negotiate, obviously it makes negotiating much more difficult. So we're hoping that Ambassador de Alba can find a way forward. There gets agreement among countries to come back next week to report on what we could do between now and Cancun to resolve that contentious issue. Okay, one of the issues that's getting a lot of attention here is what we've labeled the gigaton gap, which is the fact that the actions needed to reduce emissions sufficiently to keep us below the 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperatures above pre-industrial levels are not yet on the table. The pledges that have been put on the table during and since Copenhagen probably put us on track for a 3.5 to 4 degree increase, depending on whose analysis you look at. Most of the world leaders in Copenhagen committed to try to keep global temperature increases below 2 degrees. There's a big gap there to be closed. We're trying to get countries here to acknowledge the existence of that gap and commit to hold a workshop later this summer or fall where we can start discussing ways to close that gap. Everything from more ambitious commitments by developed countries to reduce their emissions, to assistance to developing countries to reduce the rate of deforestation more quickly than is currently envisioned, to looking at new issues like black carbon or some of the more exotic beach gases, as they're called, where we might be able to make some progress and bring in some. Okay, so we are proposing this idea of holding a workshop sometime this next sessions of negotiations. Talk about this ton gap, what can be done to close it, and hopefully bring some ideas forward to the Cancun Climate Summit in Mexico in December. That's one of the major issues we're talking about. Of course, we're also talking about the issues of loopholes in the negotiations. The one that's getting the most attention here is the so-called logging loophole, where a number of the industrialized countries, particularly some of the European forested countries, are trying to create accounting rules that would allow them to exaggerate the emissions uptakes of their forests and therefore reduce what they have to do in the energy sector. Basically fool the atmosphere or try to fool the atmosphere. Of course, you can't fool Mother Earth, but you can try to fool the detractors and the negotiators, those that are keeping score. So we're trying to make sure that that issue is raised from a technical issue to a political issue, and that there's pressure put on these countries that are pushing this loophole to take it off the table and go back to true accounting standards for forestry and land use change. Well, I mean, what folks can do at home is let their countries know that they want leadership here in Bonn and in the road up to Cancun, that they want the world to press forward for an aggressive treaty that requires reduced emissions by industrialized countries, that creates a real partnership with developing countries through finance and technology assistance to help them do their share of the lifting. Because the reality is we can't sit here pointing fingers at each other and saying your end of the lifeboat is sinking. We're all in the same boat together, and we stay afloat, sink together. It's time to get past the north-south confrontation and create a true partnership. I'm encouraged by the Mexican presidency, by the chair of the negotiations. They both have a good, positive attitude, and I think we're looking for a process that's inclusive and transparent, that doesn't repeat the mistakes we saw in Copenhagen, where a lot of countries felt shut out of the process, and that gives everyone a sense that they're part of this together. Of course, we have to overcome political resistance in many of the countries, including my own country, the United States, where the oil and the coal industries and others that have a vested interest in not reducing emissions rapidly are trying to confuse the public and create fear about the costs of taking action to deal with climate change. Day 3 tomorrow, as I said, we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty business of particular issues and the so-called contact groups. There'll be a number of them happening tomorrow in different rooms. That'll basically be in that mode through the rest of this week into the beginning of next week, and then they'll come back and report on where they stand. The chair of the main negotiating body has indicated that she hopes to listen to the discussions and the suggestions this week, and over the weekend come back with some revisions in her proposed text so that next week they can actually start negotiating section by section on a draft to take forward. I should say there's 2 weeks of negotiations here, and then there's only 2 more weeks left between this meeting in Bonn and the actual beginning of the Cancun negotiations in December. So this week and next week represent about 50% of the negotiating time before delegates and ministers come to Cancun, Mexico in December, where they hope to actually reach some agreements on some new decisions. Sure. Glad to be with you.